Hello, my name is Justin Bright, and welcome to Kerbal Space Program version 1.8.1 in my next small step RP-1 career mode playthrough. And we have here another update on all sorts of things. But first, we are launching up another Corona satellite before we even brought down our first one because for whatever reason all the science stopped, so it's not ready to come down. It was supposed to be, but it's not, so whatever. Anyways, we are just about ready to launch, so 3, 2, 1, ignition. And liftoff of the Corona 2 satellite, bringing up another Corona spy/film satellite up into low Earth orbit. This time we are aiming for a 75-degree inclination at a lower circular orbit, I think. I think the other one's a little bit higher than this one, but it really doesn't matter all that much. This film experiment only cares that I am in a low Earth orbit and not above 445 kilometers, and it requires a an inclination between 60 and 100 degrees or something like that. So anyways, it's not that big of a deal where we put this, so we're just trying to get it up into maybe a slightly different orbit to maybe get slightly different biomes, that sort of thing. Other thing to talk about is you'll notice that the sun flare has changed once again, and that is indicative of the fact that I have once again trashed my entire install and rebuilt it from scratch. I don't know, is that something that anybody else does? Like, I get like a weird amount of, it's like soothing to actually follow the instructions on mod installs. Like, I'll go through and I'll like mod the crap out of Witcher 3 or something like that, and then I'll never actually play it. Or like Skyrim, things like that. I'll never actually play them, but I will do all the mod installing because I find it to be weirdly satisfying. I don't know. So that's what I've done here, because I was getting told a whole bunch that my mods were out of date in their install, and like, hey, you need to go update and fix this. Like, see, the coasts have been fixed in one of these updates to RSS, and listen to that audio muffler. I finally installed that one, and that's actually pretty darn cool. I like that. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do that one, but I'm enjoying it so far. So anyways, I was getting told that there were some updates that needed to be had, and I was having trouble keeping track of what I had installed manually and what wouldn't be installed manually. Like what was through CCAN and whatever else. So I just threw the whole thing out and started from scratch, and I think that works pretty well because it gives me a nice clean slate and makes sure that I'm like, there's nothing weird happening. I don't have any experimental DLLs or whatever that I've downloaded. And it's all, what it should be. So that is what I have done. And that includes, one of the things that includes is the sun flare from Scatterer is back. And we have decoupled our first stage, and we are now coasting up and flipping out a little bit, which is not super great. And warming up. Wow, this is weird. I don't love this. All right, dude, you're going to get into... It looks like this coast is going to end in just about the right time. And there we go, gimbling back down, and we are all set. Yeah, I hate that. That was not great. I guess it was far down enough that... man, you just can't... It's just completely silent, which I'm not sure I actually love. I do want to hear my rockets. Anyways, so yeah, I'm not sure that was a great maneuver. I think it must have released a little bit early or staged a little bit early. I should have given it more time while it was coming out of the atmosphere to stabilize before I actually fired up the upper stage, but it's fine. It's not that big of a deal. Or maybe omitted the coast entirely. I've had that suggestion made as well, that I just omit the coast and then I don't have to worry about a lot of these issues that I've been having. But yeah, we are headed up into a good orbit with our Corona 2 satellite. Audio muffler was really neat when it was just making it like slowly fade to silence, but now that it's just like dead silent, I don't love that. And there's no music. Like the... Oh wait. Nope, there's the music. It was very subtle. yeah, so I guess we'll see. I just decided to try this one out, so we'll see if it is something that sticks or not. I like, even if it's unrealistic, I like being able to hear the roar of engines in space, just so that I know that they're on, for one thing. So it makes perfect sense that it would just be silent and we would just hear whatever music we were playing for ourselves for this rocket. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe you can actually hear something muffled from the internal part of a rocket. We'll find out when I launch a astronaut on a Mercury capsule here pretty soon. But yeah, so anyways, that is a long way of to get to the fact that we are just now launching another Corona satellite, which is should not be all that weird or different from the first one. The first one, of course, is still in orbit, and as we can kind of see, you can look and see that for whatever reason, the science was not running for most of the time. Like, it only looks like it's been going about 20 days instead of the 100 days or so that it's been up in orbit. So that may be related to having just reinstalled everything from scratch. That may have just like come off because of that. Which would be expected, really. Like, that's not, like, none of my other satellites were deactivated, though, and this seems to have happened before the date that I had this installed, but you would expect that it would mess some things up if you reinstalled it, right? But in any case, that means that this one is going to have to stay up in orbit for a little bit longer, which I'm not too troubled by. Like, it seems to be working just fine. The power is working okay. It's in shadow, so that's why it has a duration, but the duration is gonna last just fine. It's actually a really well provisioned satellite for what that is worth. And we're gonna put up another one, and that'll be good. Looks like the Agena is treating me pretty well. I've been misnaming this one. This is not the Agena B, this is the Agena D. Which is one of the because it's one of the later models with the extended nozzle, better reliability, better performance, etc., etc., etc. So yeah, that's what we are using up here, and that is getting a decent amount of data units. The ignition failure rate is still pretty darn high for a upper stage like this, but it looks like we have done it. We have gotten ourselves into a good orbit. Fabulous. All right, so we can close that off, and now let's just go ahead and open Smartass, and we are going to point ourselves down towards the sun, as we have done so many times before. I also wanted to look at persistent rotation. Someone mentioned that I can change the reference body. Relative rotation. Select target and map to set as reference sun. I'm not sure what that means. Set? Sun. Yes? No? Reference sun? Anyways, this is supposed to maintain rotation in like an SAS kind of way if you use normal SAS and not MechJeb Smartass to maintain orientation like in a station keeping sort of way, right? Like, so it would be as if I had actually, been using RCS to constantly track that target. I'm not sure that's actually going to count because I'm going to kick off the stage that has control, so I'm not sure how much that's going to happen or matter. But that's something that I've been told about that I had no idea was a thing. So we are going to be looking into that, especially in the future when it might matter that you have probes that are, you want to make sure that the probe is always pointing directly at the sun no matter what your orientation is. So things that are like interplanetary missions, things like that, that can be quite important. So yeah, we are very slowly, very gently rotating around to face the sun so that we can get this probe also set up. We are doing the same experiments and the same photography as we are with the other, our other Corona satellite. And like I said, we are going to do probably at least 5 of these, maybe more, depending on whether or not any of them fail early. But yeah, that's how many we're going to need to do to get all of the science that we could possibly want out of this. All right, so we are oriented properly. And so there's nothing else to do except for kicking off this stage here. Oh, that was weird. It like did the first half of the decoupling noise, but then cut it off. So yeah, this is just going to hang right out. And yeah, I guess we will see you when we get to in 142 days or something like that. Let's put in another, I think it was 142. All right, so we'll see you then, and hopefully this will work better than the other one and not cut off weirdly and arbitrarily. And now for this, I am going to once again point ourselves orbital retrograde. Ooh, let's not do it directly at the other... Oh, do I not have control? Are we not over a ground station? All right, orbital retrograde. Let's try to make sure you're not pointed directly at the other satellite, if you please. Because we still have one ignition, and off we go! See ya, friend! Meow! Okay, so, mission complete. We are going to... Hold on, I should probably wait until we have sun again. Just so that Kerbalism thinks that we have 100% solar... coverage on the solar panels before I unload the vessel. All right, absolutely gorgeous. I do like Scatterer Sunflare. I think I enjoy it a little bit better than the other one that I had been using. I like the bright, just incandescent whiteness of it as opposed to the big soft yellow. Okay, so we have that and no connection. I thought I had a connection. Anybody? Connection? Okay, there we go. Okay, so we have a connection, we have perpetual power, and everything is lovely, so let's call this mission successful for now. On the pad and preparing for the launch of the Mercury Tela 2 is Valerie Dunn. She is ready to become the first Kerbal in orbit. And otherwise, this should be a fairly standard new Tela H1 that will be igniting in 3, 2, 1. And liftoff of Tela Mercury 2, which is going to be approximating our the actual Mercury Atlas 6 flight. So if our last flight was Mercury Atlas 5, which was launching Enos the Chimp into orbit, this is going to be Mercury Atlas 6, which was the actual first flight of John Glenn and the first orbital flight of an American, sometime behind Yuri Gagarin's first orbital flight by the Russians. So yeah, we are now on our very first orbital flight. So we are hopefully going to knock this out. And Valerie seems to be acclimating nicely. She was not having a great time at first, but seems to be getting things under control. All right. So now that listen to that. You jump into the cockpit and you can actually hear the rumble like muffled. Okay. So all right, I'm back on board with using the sound muffler mod, because that's pretty damn cool. I don't like how it's silent when you're actually up in space, but this is pretty darn neat. All right, so Tela H1 is burning hard up into orbit. We have quite a bit of a trip ahead of us yet. The H1C engines are performing nominally so far, and we are really stacking up a lot of data units, which is something that I like about, RP-1, is that when you use an engine a whole bunch, then you will reap the benefits of that engine being very, very reliable. And because I'm using 2 on every one of these launches and 1 on every Thor-able Delta-ish launch, I'm getting a lot of data units all the time. So I've done some updates, and I'm noticing that I'm losing some frames, and I'm not super stoked about that. Like, I went through and I deleted a whole bunch of debris, I deleted some extra satellites, but it's still, yeah, I don't know. I think I've set something up weird or different that has caused it to lose some frames while I'm in the atmosphere. I think it's probably because I've got everything absolutely maxed out, like 16K ground textures and the most the high-res atmosphere stuff and all that. So I lose a couple frames when I'm in Earth's atmosphere, but it clears up once I get out. But yeah, we are going pretty well. We have about 40 seconds left until our booster cutoff and separation. And this does indeed model the Mercury Atlas 6 flight of Friendship 7 with John Glenn. There was a whole bunch of, as was very endemic in the early US space program, there were a bunch of errors that kept John Glenn on the pad in the capsule for like 3.5 hours before he even got off the ground. But they managed to get all that stuff figured out, and then there were even more errors on the way up into orbit. So it's, like I said, it's kind of a thing. Like, there was a lot of issues like that in especially in the early American space program. I'm sure the Soviets had similar issues, but you know, you just don't hear about them. All right, so we can just listen to Valerie's perspective on the launch from inside the tiny little Mercury capsule, which is really, really small. Like I've mentioned before that my profile picture is of me inside a mock Mercury capsule at Kennedy Space Center, and it's just a tiny little thing, so I can't really imagine being up in orbit for all that long. And on that note, we have the... Oop, that sounded like the boosters have cut and have separated, so we are now on just the sustainer core on our way up into orbit. So the first orbital flight contract wants us to get above 150 kilometers, which is just fine. We are targeting 200 kilometers all up, which I think is very, very doable to get back down from. And we need to be up there for about an hour and a half, and I really don't think we are going to spend much longer than that. So an orbit around Earth at this altitude is something like 20-ish minutes, give or take a couple minutes. We'll find out when we get up there, but it's not long. It's really not. So it ends up being a fairly quick thing. Like, we should ideally get about 3 orbits was how long John Glenn stayed up, because there were issues and they wanted to cut his flight a little bit short. But we want to get up into orbit and stay there for the hour and a half, and then we will figure out how to get back home and drop us into the ocean. You see that we are already ticking down the timer on the crew duration record of 1 day, and if we look at our Kerbalism stuff, you can see that we do have everything except for the electric charge. And once we separate the booster and we're not using the heavy avionics, that will actually go up to be almost a day, but I really don't want to cut. I don't want to cut that short, or cut that close at all. It is really not something that I'm interested in pushing the boundaries on. I've mentioned before that pilot safety is something that I'm not sure there's much in the way of consequences for. In RP-1, I'm going to lose a bunch of reputation, and I think you get grounded for a certain amount of time. Like, you can't fly crewed flights, or maybe any flights, I don't know, for a while. But it's not something that I want to mess with, right? I want to do everything I can to make sure that these flights are very safe. Oh, I didn't even notice. Yeah, so when the boosters separated, not too long after that, it must have kicked off the abort tower, which is actually exactly how it happened in the real Mercury Atlas program. They kicked off the escape tower after the boosters were separated. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the abort profile was, but yeah, it was removed at this point, and I figure they were able to get away from the spacecraft, or from the booster stage, without as much trouble once you were outside of the atmosphere. All right, so there we go. We are now in orbit, and I've got a couple of my frames back. I wonder if it's not an engine-related thing. Maybe engine light is doing that to me. So yeah, I'll mess around with that and see if I can't get that fixed. But in any case, we have done it. We are here in orbit. We have a good 200 kilometer circular orbit around Earth, and we have put the first woman in space. Valerie Dunn is our first person. We've gotten 5,000 meters per second crude speed record and 7,000 meters per second crude speed record, so that's a little extra funds, which I am totally happy about. So now we have, 24 hours for that. That's not happening. Got the speed record, fine. Can't do the reach orbit and return safely because that's supposed to be testing for this profile exactly. And first orbital flight crew, that's where we're at right now. And we have an hour and a half to go. So it's time to decouple from the booster. Shoom. And there we go. We are free and away. The booster is going to just hang up here and continue to pretend to be an SSTO, but we now have Valerie Dunn's capsule out and ready to roll. So let's go ahead and activate our RCS and so forth. And there we go. We have control. Valerie is able to go through and perform tests of the flight control system, which, speaking of which, we have a couple of experiments that we want to run. So we have, we're doing crew reports and telemetry, whatever, that's fine. I think most of that should be done already, but the two experiments that I have packed on here are indeed early experiments that were done on board the Mercury capsule. So flight control experiments, I have to believe is the exact type of thing where she was messing with, or John Glenn was messing with the controls to make sure that they were able to orient the spacecraft and get it to handle in ways that they would expect. So that is that. So there was manual control and there was also automatic control. And the interesting thing is that they had separate tanks for each one. Like there were different tanks of RCS fuel that maintain the reserves for the automatic maneuvers and also for the manual maneuvers and the automatic maneuvers. So let's give her a nice view, although I think I'm pointed in such a way that that's a little weird. There we go. Let's just give her a beautiful view of Earth as she's rotating around and able to do her experiments. So yeah, flight control experiments. That's a really important thing, and it was something that led on to the more important work of figuring out how we were going to orient and dock and rendezvous in orbit, because during the Mercury program we just didn't really know. Like, we didn't have experience in that because we'd never done it, and it doesn't work the way you think it would. Anybody who's actually played the game knows that orbital rendezvous does not work at all like you imagine that it would. Okay, so I'm gonna orient her maybe this way. Oh yeah, because that's upside down. Yeah, it's always oriented differently than you would expect, I find. Okay, but I should probably stop wasting all of the high-test peroxide. So we are going to stop messing around with that, just flipping around. And now she is in orbit and able to watch the Earth go by. The other experiment is liquids in microgravity, which works about like you'd imagine, where they were trying to figure out what happened to liquids when you're in microgravity. Like, how does water flow in microgravity? Does it flow? How do different fluids in different environments and different vessels interact and work? And so we were just figuring out that stuff as well. So yeah, those are the experiments that we are running, and those are going to take about 3 hours. And so that is actually the length of time that we are going to take on this first mission, because we are going to try to keep this as short as possible. 3 hours is at least a lot less than a day. But there's a lot of things to consider for the length of time we're going to be in orbit. So we actually do not have enough electric charge, as I've mentioned, to do a full day's orbit. There's plenty of food, water, oxygen, and lithium hydroxide for the non-regen scrubbers that will renew the atmosphere in the vessel and reduce the CO2. We have plenty of everything except for electric charge, but we're going to need more electric charge, and we'll probably want to test like including a service module, right? So that would be something that would be important, because when we get to Gemini, we're going to be doing a lot of service module type work where we have where we attach a service module and a propulsion stage and things like that to move it places. I don't think that we're going to take the Mercury capsule on any journey further out than low Earth orbit. I really don't think I would inflict a lunar journey on someone in this teeny tiny can, and I'm not sure that they would like not go crazy during that trip anyways. All of these things, the living space and the comfort, I think would stack up to drive the poor pilot crazy by the time they got to the moon, let alone coming back. So we are not going to worry too much about that. We're going to wait for Gemini, where we will have a lot more room and the ability to have bigger and better service modules. So anyways, that I think is going to button this up for the next 3 hours worth of science. We're going to let Valerie get to her scientific endeavors. She has a lot of work to do up here in space, which is something that I always find interesting. Like, you think that, you know, you're just packed into a tin can and launched into orbit, and then that's it. Like, the expectation was that you were going to get up into space, but the work has only just begun. They are busy up there on the ISS, and then in all of the manned space missions that we've done so far. They usually have an absolutely packed schedule that's defined down to the minute, and mission control is haranguing them about it. But they are highly professional folks that know what they're doing, so that is totally fine. She is up there to do a job, and she is going to get it done. Ugh, no pun intended. All right, unfortunately, the little science blurbs, like that crew report just flew by, and it had like a really fun quote from John Glenn about eating from a food tube. And I time warped through some of it, but even the ones that I didn't, like, they go by so fast that I can't actually stop and read them, which is a bummer, because that would be a neat thing to do while I'm flying these missions. But so anyways, we've gotten a couple crew reports, and that is very, very cool. Oh, I wonder if... Oh, yeah, I can... They are indeed read out here. Not that I can see them. I wonder if there's a way to make this bigger. Maybe not, but that's fine. Yeah, so there's some interesting stuff there, but yeah, not something that we are going to be able to stop and read, but maybe you can pause the video and see some of them as they go by. They're really interesting quotes from the actual astronauts, especially the early astronauts. And the fun thing about those is they kind of give you if you've ever listened to some of the chatter between ground control and the and astronauts, like from historical footage or even from more recent missions to the ISS, there's a constant like stream of consciousness conversation that happens of like, okay, here's what I'm doing this, and this is what I'm experiencing. And especially on these early missions, that was kind of how they communicated. And it was a really interesting and neat thing where they were just very busy just relaying everything back down. So that is that. We have finished our science. She is doing fine. She is 3% stressed, which that seems fine. She is otherwise doing incredibly well. So I think it's time for us to plan our return down to Earth. And so we're going to want to be a little careful about how and where we do that. So let's see. All right, so we have plotted our re-entry maneuver. We are going to be burning completely retrograde just southwest of Vandenberg. So we are going to be descending down to touch the atmosphere just east of Brownsville, which hopefully will bring us down into the Atlantic Ocean just southeast of Cuba, according to trajectories anyway, so we'll see what this actually looks like. But yeah, I've had a lot of trouble with the heat on capsules. It feels like anything except for the steepest possible re-entry with the Mercury capsule causes it to just explode, which I don't think is how that's supposed to be. Like, I thought that this had a low Earth orbit rated heat shield, but yeah, I've found that I need to be very, very careful with how we perform our re-entries for reasons. There's been a lot of discussion about the balance or lack thereof of heat shields and capsules according to the new heating fixes that were added to Ferrum Aerodynamics in the last couple of weeks. So that's something that we are suffering for out here on the bleeding edge of updates. But in any case, we are about a minute away from our retro burn, and hopefully this one works. I haven't tested this. I don't think I've tested this exactly like this, so I guess we're going to see. We are going to point nodeward, and we are going to commence with the retrofire in 2, 1. Fire the engines! And yeah, like I've mentioned before, these are... this is kind of an abstraction on 3 individual solid rocket motors. So they actually did fire like in 10-second chunks, 5 seconds apart with some overlap in the whole thing. And I'm not even sure how that was balanced. Maybe they just fired RCS to compensate for the asymmetry. But I can see why they would make that something that is much simpler in the Kerbal Space Program part by altering the thrust curve. All right, so that completed. We have an apogee of 200 kilometers and a perigee of negative 303 kilometers. So this should get us down into the thick part of the atmosphere to slow us down quickly before the heating kills us dead. All right, we are just above the atmosphere, so it's time to kick off the retro pack and also the nose fairing, which come off very easily as opposed to how it did for poor John Glenn. So that was actually a big problem in his reentry. A reading that they got during the second orbit of John Glenn's Friendship 7 was saying that the heat shield was only being held on by the straps of the retro pack, which is, you know, not great. Because if that heat shield came off or slipped or whatever, it could expose the vessel to the terrifyingly deadly plasma of reentry and tear it apart or tear a hole in it or something, which would, you know, that would not be good. That would be off nominal, we'll say. So they made the decision to keep the retro pack attached to the bottom of the spacecraft, even though that would cause some obvious aerodynamic issues and cause other issues as well. Like I've mentioned that there was automatic and manual RCS fuel that they were using to orient the spacecraft, and they were using that to dampen the oscillations that were caused when, you know, the dang retro pack straps and stuff were flapping in the plasma and disintegrating. And to try to control that, they were just burned all of their fuel. They emptied out both tanks completely. All right, so Trajectories is disagreeing with MechJeb as to where exactly we are going to land, but we will be south of the Kennedy Space Center and hopefully in the ocean and not in, you know, on South America. That would be great. So we'll see how that goes, I suppose. But I think that should be fine either way. Hopefully, I think the more dangerous thing is surviving the reentry more than it is surviving the impact with the ground or water. So yeah, you can imagine now the way that they were just they knew this was an issue, and the reading was telling them what it was telling them, and there was nothing they could do to check. Like, he couldn't poke his head out of the capsule and take a look at the bottom. They didn't have a camera outside like we do, where we can look and see, like, oh no, it looks fine. They just had the readings, and the readings were thankfully erroneous, or at least erroneous enough that it didn't cause any issues when they were the heat shield did not detach or anything like that. So yeah, we are coming down, and it looks like we are over land for a good long time. So hopefully we clear out of South America. I do not know my geography well enough to tell you what country we are going when they are just featureless masses here, but it looks like we might clear the other side, and now we are starting to get to the point where the roll thruster, the external roll thruster, is beginning to cook, which we know it is not occluded for whatever reason. Zero exposed area. I think it's just conducting in. for reasons I don't really understand. But this is kind of what it would look like for John Glenn when he was coming down, because the straps of the retro pack were like flapping around and disintegrating in the plasma. So he wasn't sure if it was that or if it was the freaking heat shield coming apart underneath him. So all right, we are slamming down into the atmosphere and beginning to decelerate rapidly. Our G-forces are rising. We are at 4 Gs and climbing. Our heat is heating is pretty significant, but hopefully we will get down slow enough before this heat becomes a problem. But we are slowing down much better in my previous tests, because what I'd done before is I'd run a couple simulations where I did a 60 kilometer apogee or a 50 kilometer apogee, and I was exploding. Like the Mercury capsule was just exploding every time. Like the overheat is just pretty out of whack, and I think that's something that they're working on, but it's a difficult thing to debug. So you can see I have like all the extra debug information here, where the internal temp is just rising, and the maximum internal temperature is very, very low on this part, which means it would explode if that hits maximum. So it's convecting for whatever reason from the ooh, look at that, 5, 8, a little bit more than 8 Gs. Yeah, she did not love that, but she is still possibly going to pass out. 92.5% consciousness meter. And that's dropping again as our G load decreases. So Valerie survived a very spicy reentry that got very warm. But it looks like we are safe, and we are now descending exactly where I hoped we were, off the eastern coast of South America, south of Cuba, south of Florida. So we are now going to be coming down and returning home. Fabulous! And because we didn't have to burn all of our RCS fuel on the way down, there's no issue with wild oscillations as we wait for the parachute to deploy. You can see the internal temperature on this thing is now hotter than the outside skin because of how much convection it was getting off of the heat shield, which is not great. I might try like slapping a heat shield on top of the heat shield and then like removing all of the ablator from the capsule itself, and maybe that will help. Maybe that will work a little bit better, because technically it's supposed to be that heat shields do not convect much heat to the parts that they are attached to, but I'm not sure if that actually is working for the capsules. All right, the parachute has deployed, and Valerie is now dropping down slowly into the ocean, and we can see the land there. We are close enough to land that she will not have that long of a trip back home to base as the first woman in orbit. A couple more seconds until splashdown. Ooh, giant target. Bloosh. Very convenient. We landed right in the middle of the bullseye. I think that's MechJet. Hold on. Let's see if I can turn that off. Landing guidance. Landing predictions. Nope. Maybe that's trajectories. I thought I saw this before I installed trajectories, but anyways, weird fussiness aside, we have done it. She is home and just now needs to wait for the I beg your pardon? What do you mean you failed the contract? What the hell is that? I wasn't trying to do that contract. Oh, that's super annoying. I think because I had a crewed vessel up, it failed this contract on me, which I do not think is fair at all, because I was trying to do something else. Like, it tried to do it, but noticed that it was a crewed vessel, and so it just failed. Like, I don't think that expired. I think I still had like 100 or 200 days on that. Oh, that's super annoying. Yeah, that's really annoying. But we did get 360,000 funds back for completing the first orbital flight. This is a most historic day. The first human to orbit the Earth has returned home safely. So let's return her home safely. All right, so that gave Valerie a 700-day boost in her final retirement date, which is good. We've got some funds, but less than we should, and she has advanced to level 1. Fabulous, so our first experienced pilot. And we got some crew science recovered. Fabulous. And there we go. So that is that. I am going to go... All right, it's time for me to go be salty about that contract some more. So let's see. Oh, okay. No, that's... All right, fine. That's reasonable. Shoot. I should have looked into that. Okay, so that turns that from a completely annoying thing to a... that is not my fault to a completely annoying thing that is my fault, which that's a much more common thing. So that's frustrating. I didn't think about that. There's these whole series of contracts for returning, reaching orbit and returning safely that you can't do after you've done first orbital flight. So I just knocked myself down 225,000 funds for failing that contract, and then locked myself out of all of these contracts, which that's frustrating, but I think it's going to be okay. I think we'll survive. We've made a decent amount of money, and I guess unless I go back, there's not really anything I can do about that. So there you go. That's just kind of what it is. So we are going to now instead be able to do orbital flights. So there are these are orbital flight contracts that you can do on a repeatable basis, I think. So this would be the Mercury program level single person LEO orbital missions. So, and they'll give us about 120, looks like 115,000 funds per due, which is nice. So that will actually help us fund the program and earn a little bit of that money that I just screwed myself out of back. Little pro tip for everybody there: do your reach orbit and return safely to Earth contracts before your orbital return program. There are a whole bunch of them that you can do, and you'll get a bunch of money and blah, 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 blah. Man, so don't get yourself knocked out of that like I did. Okay, so we have early docking procedures coming up. I think it's time for us to start working on second generation capsules. So that'll give us more stuff, and that'll allow us to transition smoothly from Mercury to Gemini, which is fabulous. And then now that we've gotten those locked in, now it's time for us to start backfilling out the some more orbital rockets and some more power and avionics and that sort of thing. So I wanted to rush that to make sure that we were able to smoothly transition, because we are not going to want to mess around with Mercury for all that much time. Just a few seconds to go on the launch of the Surveyor 2 satellite, which is going to hopefully be a probe that lands on the moon. We have ignition and liftoff, and we have cleared the tower. Fabulous. So yeah, this is basically the same architecture with a small update that I have made to the, to the probe body, so that it was a little more balanced, because it definitely was not entirely balanced. There was like a 0.05 kilonewton torque on it, but that's really it. Everything else was completely user error that caused my previous mission to fail. So hopefully that will not happen this time, so I will see you up in orbit. One thing, so I was trying to eliminate some other mods to see what might have been causing my low frame rate issues, and it was definitely trajectories, because that's the only thing that I've changed is removing trajectories, and now we are back to being very, very smooth. So that's an unfortunate thing. I really like the trajectories mod, but it works really hard to do what it does. Like, it actually uses a lot of CPU and makes the game chug. So that's unfortunate. I'm not sure what there is that I could do to make that not chug so hard, but whatever. I'd rather have all of the other mods that we have installed. Everything else, MacLeod has some landing guidance, so we'll use that. So anyways, see you in orbit for real this time. Alright, just a couple seconds until main stage cutoff. There we go, that fires off a little bit. And we are now igniting, and we have a good ignition on the Agena B for our orbital insertion. I've turned off coasts in here, like omit coast, because I've heard that helps. You know, it helps the program not be as wonky when you have long coasts. but one way or the other, like I avoided it for a really long time because it seemed to give me worse numbers. Like it seems to leave me with fewer delta V than when I launch normally, but I have enough padding and this booster is reliable enough that I don't have to worry about that as much. Like, not that it's reliable and I don't have to worry about it, but like it puts me into the right orbit with enough delta V to do the mission. So if I lose like 1 or 2 delta V by having a launch that is more easily automatable rather than absolutely perfectly ideal given the circumstances of the atmosphere, I think that that's worth it because, you know, I like being able to just design. I like the design part more than the manual flying because the manual flying is a little bit weird and wonky. All right, I'm just so happy to have my frames back. After that brief, after my brief playtime before I had uninstalled this trajectories, like it was just kind of like harrowing going back to that. Like I thought I bought a really nice computer so that I wouldn't have to deal with this. All right, just coming up to the end of our orbital insertion burn. And boop. All right, beautiful. And it didn't even waste my ignition. I feel like I've had some issues with that as well in the past. But so there we go. Now we are in a good orbit with the Surveyor 2 spacecraft, which is pretty much identical, but it just has had the balance shifted. You see that the antenna is now not completely centered. It's just got a little asymmetrical thing going on there with the thermometer and the S-band antenna. But yeah, otherwise the profile is going to be almost exactly the same. Like the broad strokes of the profile are going to be exactly the same, but I'm going to do a much better job, hopefully, of targeting our landing site. Okay, so we have plotted our maneuver to the moon, and I'm realizing now that I should have looked at the phase of the moon before I actually started planning out this mission, because this is the worst possible time to make this transfer. Ideally, we would have it where the moon was on the other side, so that we were getting sunlight and were having facing Earth for communications. That would be nice. But it looks like this time we're just going to get one of the two. We have I've just plotted a standard MacLeod intercept just to get us in the general area, and then I'm going to tweak this from there. And I've turned on the landing guidance landing prediction, which tells me where on the moon we are actually going to land. So this tells us that this is our actual impact trajectory, so this is how we're coming in, and this is the point that we are going to land at, because it's going to rotate around to this point by the time we get there. So that can help us much more precisely land on the moon, or any other body, I suppose, when we are getting to a point where that matters. But this is our very first landing, and it's going to be in the dark, which I'm not super thrilled about. So we are going to take a look at, I'm going to take a look and see if I can't find a better place to land that's at least closer to where the sun will be, because I know I don't have time to kind of dawdle. Oop, that's too much. I don't have time to dawdle such that we will, what do you call it? Like wait around until the sun turns. This thing will run out of battery eventually. The Tier 3 communications is really pricey, and this mission is only planned to last for a couple of days. Getting the science off of the lunar surface and sending it back home as quickly as possible before, the batteries give out. We'll do something like this with the we'll do something like this with the expectation that we'll miss it and have to correct a little bit anyways. But yeah, I'm hoping for like around this area on the moon, so that we can make sure we have a little bit of buffer and we're close to where the sun is going to be rising on the moon in a little while. All right, just setting up power configuration for off and on so that we can make sure that we are maintaining as much power as we possibly can for our flight. All right, starting our burn now. And there we go. I was fussing around for a minute there. I forgot that I'd turned off the avionics to try to test something. But yeah, there we go. We are now burning on our way, and we can use RCS to kind of finish it off and fix whatever errors that we end up having here. So yeah, this is, like I said, otherwise it's pretty much the same probe as it was before. I'm realizing now that the Tier 3 power or Tier 3 radio transmission is so freaking power hungry that I am having a lot of trouble keeping up with it with my solar panels. And I'm thinking now, I'm finally realizing that my Corona satellites that I've put up, that's the thing limiting how fast they're going. They're like not getting the science done very quickly, the pictures done, because they're just out of power all the time and they have to shut down and recharge their batteries, which, you know, is not great. So I need to figure out a way to get more power, more batteries, maybe send up better, more robust Corona satellites in the future. And the same goes for this Surveyor satellite, this probe, the lander that we're sending up. We're going to want to send up more robust things in the near future with later iterations of this. But right now, we're just trying to get the method down before we really start ramping up. Before we start ramping up the payload that we're going to be dropping onto the moon, we want to make sure that our methodology is correct. All right, here we go. Just a couple more seconds on this burn. 2, 1. Wow, that went by fast. Okay, so as usual, we got to wait for connection, but then we will get this fixed. All right, and then with RCS, we can push ourselves down into an orbit that will get us a landing. All right, so here we go, coming in now. And yeah, so we're going to flip around and I'm going to try to point to the other side of the moon. Yeah, because the most important thing is going to be having good communications. So we are going to call that good, I think. That should give us plenty of good facing to the Earth and also get us into a position where we can get sunlight sooner. One thankful thing is that it'll take us 4 days to get there, so hopefully the sun will, you know, rotate around a bit between now and then. Okay, so in the meantime, let's point ourselves sun down. All right, there you have that. Then we can turn off our upper stage avionics, save on the batteries just a bit on the way across. Unfortunately, we still are using up just so much power that we're going to need to shut down. Gosh, what is it? What can we even shut down to save this? Because we theoretically should be like almost perpetual. Okay, so it's my magnetic scan is what is pushing this up over the limit here. So what I've done is I have this going on, so we can just rely on the probe's ability to shut itself down when it needs to, and then collect power and then turn itself back on. That should not be too much of an issue. It's just a matter of all this collection of data that is happening with the magnetic scan. We only have 2 days of that left anyways. Well, actually, we don't even have 2 days of that left. Must be low orbit science. So once I get out of the low orbit environment, that's going to stop. And there we go. See, magnetic scan is completed and we are now back up to perpetual power and our battery is filling back up. Not very quickly, unfortunately. But in any case, that should work out. And so now we are on our way out to the moon. All right, so this is what it looks like our landing trajectory is going to be. So that's a little bit further in than I had expected. I'm not sure what caused that. I guess it might have just been the maneuvers that I was making on my way over here that threw my trajectory slightly out of whack. But that's fine. Maybe that'll be fine. Hopefully we'll be able to kind of shut down until the sun... Well, shoot. Yeah, I don't know. Hopefully we'll have enough battery power to actually execute some stuff before we shut down or if there's any further issues. So what we are going to do is we are going to create a node because we want to make sure that we are accounting for the gravity of the moon on our way down. So basically right here, I want to just create a node and put down... I don't know, 2,400. I think that's about how much delta V we are going to need. I think that's about how fast I was going last time I got here. So we'll just say 2,500, just shy of that, like right at the surface, pure surface retrograde. And what that's going to get us is that's going to tell us where we should orient ourselves. Because something that we can do at this point is, technically, we don't even need to have this stage, what do you call it? We don't even need to have this stage with us right now. We could have, if I was really clever and confident, done this maneuver node, pointed ourselves in the direction, spun it up, and disconnected the upper stage all the way back in Earth's low orbit. I'm not confident that I would have been able to do that or handle that. So what I'm going to instead do is just point at the sun and try to get as much power as I can between now and then. Because if I do that and then I shut down the avionics, then we will actually get another 18 hours of power generation before we dip down below the horizon of the moon. Yeah, unfortunately, this has a very slow burn on power, but it is, in fact, draining power. So that's pretty unfortunate, but we'll see what we can do with this one, and then I will adjust the power draw on the next probe. Okay, so now that we are, the sun is blocking out the moon is blocking out the sun. Now it's time for us to point at the node, activate our avionics, and kick off this booster stage. Although we are going to need to be careful about ullaging and so forth, so I may hold on to it until the last minute. Which is only in about half an hour, so it's not that far. We have time to land, 31 minutes. I think what we are going to do is we are going to fire up our braking maneuver like 25 seconds before impact, and that should be about right as far as our 44-second burn time, because we want it to come just so close to straight impacting. All right, so we are just a couple minutes from our impact burn. Landing predictions I have found to not be terribly helpful because it doesn't even agree with itself. It says 3 minutes 45 seconds here and 6 minutes down here, so I'm not sure what that is supposed to mean, but whatever, we can put that away. That has done very well for us so far. With 3 minutes left, we are just going to time warp a little bit further down. We are holding the correct position at this point, but what we want to do about a minute and 10 seconds down, we are going to start rotating the spacecraft. So I want to spin it up so that we can maintain some stability. I'm going to turn off Smart ASS at this point and just prepare it for what we're going to do. Five, 44. Okay, looking good. Getting a good spin on that. And let's begin ullaging up, because we are going to launch at 25 seconds. And here we go. All right, so now my palms are sweating as I prepare to cancel out as much of our speed as possible. The key thing is we really need to kill all of our vertical velocity. So when that hits 0, that is the moment that I'm going to cut this engine, kick off this braking stage, and then separate off the probe itself, which will then be trying to perform the rest of the landing on its own. So this is no longer helpful. All right, 500, 400 meters per second, 300, 200, 100, and cut. And stage. And we are 600 meters above the surface. Activate avionics. And we are firing the engine. We are mostly going sideways, which is not actually a bad thing. All right, we are 200 meters above the surface. All right, here we go. We are still 100 meters up. But we are now just like very easily bringing it down. I really wish I could see. Still good on fuel, a little bit more than 50%. Keeping that speed down. Oh, there we go. That's a good way to see the ground. And touchdown. We have landed on the moon. There we go. We did it. We got there completely in the dark, which like I really wish you guys could see, but you know, is what it is. I am gonna actually, let's see if we can't get there. Let's see if there's something I can do to make sure that this survives around to the sunny side. Because we only have 1 hour and 49 minutes. So let's shut down everything right now. Okay, shut it down. Stop sending back data. Yeah, well, we're only going to make it 2 hours, so this thing is going to die pretty quickly. But we'll get as much science as we can in the meantime. And just a couple minutes until we send back some of the first science. There we go. We have things sent back? Question mark. Oh, I have the data turned off. That makes sense. Okay, there we go. We have done it. That is our first lunar landing. We have safely landed on the moon and returned valuable science data from the surface. We now know that it's possible for a crewed craft to land there safely as well. Awesome. So next time we'll do this, you know, when you guys can see. I'm so sorry. But I think that is going to do it for us today. So yeah, we've made a lot of really good progress. We've got our first manned orbit. We've got our first probe landed on the moon. So that's fantastic work. But we've also diagnosed that I really need to work on my batteries and power generation for my probes, especially the ones doing long-term missions like the Corona satellites that are trying to do the film experiments in the orbit of Earth. I'm pretty sure that most of the stuff is being throttled by small batteries and low power generation, or at least by the high power consumption of the shiny new digital encoders in the new antenna technology. So we'll be addressing that next time. But if you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe, leave me a comment. I do love to hear from you all, and I will see you next time.